Hello and welcome to Spare Change News TV. My name is Sam Baltrusis. Hello and welcome to Spare Change News TV. My name is Sam Baltrusis. I'm the editor-in-chief of Spare Change News. Joining me today is Andrew Warburton.
Hello.
He is my right hand at Spare Change. He also is the copy editor. He writes the last word, which is the last page of Spare Change News. So tell me, Andy, how's it going with the paper? And tell me what stories you're working on and what we've published recently.
Okay, well, I mean, this week I interviewed Walter. He's one of our vendors. He told me a lot about his life, going back to when he was a kid in Gary, Indiana.
Oh, okay.
He comes from a line of steel workers. So his granddad worked in the steel works. His father worked in the steel works. I asked him if he wanted to go into the same line of work, but he said that he only visited once, and it was like 250 degrees. And he had to wear some sort of protection. He said it was like way too hot.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, the steelworks are no longer there in Gary, Indiana. They've all shut down.
So the vendor that you interviewed,
Walter
is Walter. He's a vendor now with Spare Change News. And there's a story that you told me so you're working on the story now. Yeah. But there's a story where he was you told me this on Friday about he was working on these posh apartments.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So he was living in Indiana, and then he moved to Florida. And he said in Florida is where he became homeless. And he was living in shelters. He was going to construction jobs during the day while staying in the shelters. And yeah, he sort of told me a story that kind of encapsulates, a social problem, I suppose. He said that there's a shortage of housing in Florida, or that there was sort of a very long waiting list to get housing for people who need housing. And so it's kind of just ironic, that he was living in a shelter and going to work on construction jobs every day. Basically, he said that they were kind of building luxury condos. So it just kind of contrasts so much with his own experience of living in a shelter, not being able to get housing, but then going to work for constructing luxury condos.
It sounds like our cover story. So the current edition is Spare Change News. Let's go to the .cam. Okay.
Amanda Palmer.
Well, trying to zoom into the edition here. Here we go. The cover story is Housing Hope, and so the cover story is about Mayor Walsh's plan to end chronic homelessness in 2018. So we talked to Alex Ramirez last week.
Yeah.
So housing is it's a hot button topic.
Yeah.
But there's also another hot button topic is addiction. Mm-hmm. And you did the Sober Grid story. Yeah. Sober Grid is a new app. It's sort of an app for the homeless, not the homeless community, for the sober community to connect people who are trying to get sober together. And a lot of the vendors that you talk to deal with issues related to addiction. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true, I would say. Jerry was 2 weeks ago. I interviewed him. I don't know if he described himself as a baby boomer, so he sort of was around 20 years old just when the Vietnam War was going on. So he, I don't know if he discovered drugs in Vietnam or if he was already doing drugs, but he said that he started smoking opium while he was over there in Vietnam.
Wow.
And so I did a little research into, the stories about veterans and servicemen using drugs in Vietnam, and it turns out that something like 15% of there was a report for Congress around 1970 that said 15% of servicemen were addicted to opiates during the war.
So it was opium back then, but then it transferred to other addictions like heroin and opioids.
People were smoking marijuana as well. I mean, I guess marijuana's not really as serious, but then I suppose there's the fallout from that. I mean, if they were addicted to opiates during their time, their tour of duty, then it doesn't just end there, and they come back to the US and they'll carry on experiencing problems for the next few decades. In the case of someone like Jerry.
Well, did Jerry talk about his sobriety?
Yeah, so he got sober and clean, I think, in the early 90s.
Oh, okay.
And he, it was after he'd already been working for Spare Change News for 10 years before he got sober and clean.
It's sort of like Jerry's story is pretty similar to other stories that I heard with vendors at Spare Change. A lot of people who are homeless and formerly homeless, a lot of them are sober. So it's not an issue of like people on the streets. There definitely is addiction issues with the homeless population. And I think that, but a lot of people, especially our vendors, are sober and in recovery.
Right.
And I've seen that from several interviews that you've had, that the addiction has been something in the past, but they're now clean and sober.
Another thing I've noticed actually with quite a few of the vendors that a disproportionate number of the vendors I've interviewed have experienced some sort of accident. So, being basically hit by a car and sort of having limbs broken and things like that. So I think that's another thing, seeing as it puts people out of work, it's another thing that can contribute to or exacerbate struggles with homelessness,
That actually aligns with the research. There's usually a major life event that causes someone to lose their job and then ultimately lose their home. Right. So that is pretty representative of what really happens in the homeless community. So addiction issues coupled with getting into a car accident or to having minimal access or having exorbitant medical bills can actually really result in homelessness. So we're literally a few paychecks away from being homeless, or
PTSD, I guess, in the case of veterans.
Yeah.
I know that Marty Walsh has done a lot committed a lot of money, right, towards helping homeless veterans.
Yeah, so the percentages their goal was to end veteran homelessness as well as chronic individual homelessness by 2018. The numbers have gone down dramatically with veteran homelessness, but when it comes to the numbers have gone up for chronic individual homelessness and also children. The numbers of children have spiked this past point of time census. So families, single mothers, and children I think should be definitely something that that the mayor of Boston and also Cambridge they address. Now they have the Y2Y shelter, which is opening up in November. That's going to be in Harvard Square. That's dealing with the younger population, but not necessarily children. And so there's definitely a big issue with just sort of dealing with homelessness, all different multifaceted faces of homelessness. Right. So getting back to addiction. So I went to a launch party in New York City, and I was working on I interviewed the former governor of Massachusetts, Bill Weld, and I also interviewed Tara Connor, who was our former Miss USA, for the app called Sober Grid, which we had Bo Mann, who's the CEO, on our show, and also Nick Kay, who was on the show as well. And you did the story on Sober Grid. Yeah. So it was the launch party, and we as in Spare Change News was invited, and so I had access to meet all these great, fantastic people. And one of the people that I met actually is going to become our cover story for next week. His name is Travis the Featherman Snyder. And
He's the cover.
He's going to be the cover of the next issue. Cool. And so Travis is a recovering heroin addict, and he's been sober since 2011. And so I just met him. He actually did design the Sober Grid t-shirts, so he was there to deliver the t-shirts. Okay. And I was smitten with his story. He was just so passionate about being sober and so passionate about Sober Grid that I really wanted to talk to him and maybe learn from his mistakes and also his successes, experience, strength, and hope to maybe help with my story on heroin addiction. And I think we got some really good stuff. So I'm actually going to play a video from Travis. So to give you an idea, that is Travis there at the photo shoot, at the Sober Grid photo shoot. And the photographer was Bell Soto, who's a world famous photographer. Let's go find that video. There I am at the Sober Grid launch party. Okay. Sorry. Where's that video?
Is that it?
No. There it is. All right. We're going to play this video here.
Turn the sound up.
Hey, what's shaking? My name is Travis the Featherhawk Snyder, and I'm a thankful and grateful recovering addict. Today I'm very blessed to share with you that I have lived 1,293 days clean and sober from what was a 15-year progressive addiction to drugs and alcohol. In the last 8 of those 15 years, my drug of choice was heroin. And today, I'm here to share with you 2 amazing things that I have learned in my over 3.5 years of recovery. The first of these amazing things is that by living a life of gratitude, by taking a whole new positive outlook on life, and by becoming kind and loving, caring, and compassionate, by being very aware and taking a look at yourself on a daily basis, you start to actually discover many, many things about yourself. And the more and more you discover about yourself, the more and more you begin to understand what loving yourself really means. And what I mean by loving yourself, what I'm really saying is discovering yourself, finding out who our true self really is. And the way we find out who our true self really is we expand on these qualities of love. We expand on the ability to accept. We expand and bring into our life a spiritual aspect that allows us to see things that we never saw before. It allows us to feel things that we never felt before. Aside from finding our true self and what makes us unique is this amazing ability that we now learn to foster the human connection. And the main instance for me bringing this up is the Sober Grid. Because we can find our true selves, and because we're living a life in recovery and sobriety, because we have expanded on all these great qualities, and because we now have an open mind, we now have this ability to see how important the human connection really is. And so when my friend actually mentioned me in a comment on the Sober Grid, and I saw what they were doing, I thought to myself, that is amazing. You know, here we're gonna have a place for people who are sober, who are in recovery, to go and share their experiences, share their strength, inspire others. If there's somebody struggling, they now have a place that they can go to anytime from their phone. And so when my friend mentioned me in the comment and I saw what they were doing, I was just amazed, because fostering this human connection and being able to embrace that which is the amazing thing in life, the ability to love and share through our experiences, how to create a better life for each other. I mean, what better app could you ask for? And so here we are, 2 days away from the worldwide Sober Grid app launch up in New York City. And I'm really super stoked because I shared a little bit of my story on the Sober Grid Facebook page, and the guys looked into me and they saw my story and they reached out to me and saw that I do apparel. We started connecting. We started growing on the human connection for something that we both passionately share, which is giving back. Their way of giving back is by creating this amazing app for a place like, for people like me and so many hundreds of thousands of millions of people out here in the world who are living a life of recovery, who have this ability to inspire, who have this ability to empower and share through our experiences to show people that there is a better way of life. And so when they reached out to me to make them some gear, it just added on to my initial thoughts that this is it. You know, after we find our true self, we then find how powerful the human connection is. So I'm gonna let it go at that, and I just wanna say thank you so much to the Sober Grid guys. For real, I can't wait to meet every one of you, and I am bringing up so much good energy. I'm bringing up so much, but I also remember how far I've come. And I just wanna say that I'm very thankful and grateful that I'm able to be here and to share this connection with you and to share this with the world. So I can't wait to see you guys. I can't wait to bring this stuff up. Thank you so much. Now check out the rest of this video. I think you guys are gonna like it. Peace. Thank you, Sober Grid. You rock. Woo!
So that was Travis the Featherhawk Snyder. He was the guy I interviewed. His story is really pretty remarkable. He's on what is known as a pink cloud. He's definitely like riding high with his sobriety, which is amazing. But what I got from him is like he came from like he was in a jail cell when he decided to surrender to his basically surrender. Like he gave up, and by giving up, he was able to get sober. So his story. Hopefully is going to be a role model for people that are struggling with heroin addiction locally, because we had hundreds of deaths in Massachusetts this past year. It's definitely spiked. It's affected all socioeconomic groups. Addiction knows no. Anyone can be addicted. So from all walks of life, people have faced it. We've lost people on the streets, homeless people. We've lost people who come from wealthy families. So it's definitely a scourge in our community. Mm-hmm. So from the front, what are your thoughts on on a sort of addiction from a Spare Change News point of view?
I mean, a lot of the vendors that I've interviewed, I mean, they have had experience with addiction. I mean, the last person that I interviewed, apart from Walter, which is coming up, was Mark.
Yeah.
And he describes his life as that he led the life of like a fugitive because of his drug addiction, and also it lost him his children. He now that's the one. He so he's a writer. He was recently published in the Harvard Square fiction anthology, short story anthology, Mitochondria 2.
Yeah, I was at his book launch.
You were?
Yeah, it was awesome.
He's done a lot of writing. A lot of his short stories are published, all over the internet. And when he got clean from drugs, and he got involved in Spare Change News, and he reconnected with his family because of his writing. So the fact that his writing was, all over the place. His daughter, who was working in the United Arab Emirates at the time, she saw his writing on the internet and read a lot of it, and realized that he wasn't the person that she'd been led to believe that he was.
Right.
But, based on his past drug addiction and behavior, and he went to jail and things like that. One interesting thing he said actually was that being in jail was preferable to being homeless, because he said at least there was some kind of like strange security in being in jail, whereas homelessness just still terrifies him, the idea of being homeless again, because there's like no security in being homeless.
Andy's referring to Mark D. Goldfinger. He long time contributor to Spare Change. He's actually a former editor. He's also on the board of trustees, so he's a major player in Spare Change, and he's also formerly homeless, and also has been very open about his addiction to opioids and heroin. And he actually wrote a really interesting piece this past week as well. Do you want to talk about that at all, or his?
Well, yeah. So he wrote. He wrote a history of the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Going all the way back to the original. You'd think it would begin with, I don't know who began the war on drugs. Was it Reagan?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think definitely Reagan, like Nancy Reagan especially.
Yeah, but he goes back like all the way to opium trading with China or something like that, which is really interesting. But he also, it's really interesting because actually, the fact that he published this last week was because Obama apparently has just literally signed off on, I don't know, something like 89 people who are basically serving sentences for non-violent drug crimes, and Obama has just basically what's it called when you
exonerated somebody.
He's exonerated them, and they're going to be released in November.
Yeah.
And that's everything that Mark is talking about. That these people are in jail, and it's a waste of money keeping them in jail. They're not dangerous people.
Right.
They've hurt. They've committed drug offenses, but they're not violent crimes.
Well, that's part of the story that I'm working on for Spare Change News, the next issue. Talking to Gloucester is actually, instead of arresting heroin addicts, they're seeking help for them, and it's people are following suit. So I got a phone call today from Police Chief Ryan in Arlington, in nearby Arlington, and they're launching a similar program that's where the police assist people who are addicts. Instead of arresting them and criminalizing the actions, they're actually trying to seek help for them. And I'm praying that by the police making a concerted effort to not necessarily decriminalize, but really approaching it as a disease, instead of saying like it's an act, it's a horrible act, and they can control it. When having personal experience, seeing people who are addicted, and watching, those people are not in control. They're not in control. They're addicts, and so the thing is with like Mark kind of touches on it, and even with the hopefully the police chief Ryan, when I talk to them, I like the fact that they're taking steps to really focus on the addiction and not necessarily the act of buying drugs. They're actually focusing on
or using or carrying, whatever it is.
Right, and they're taking a different approach and they're changing the dialogue, and I think that is hope for maybe making things a little, talking about it, because I think a lot of things as well, like when it comes to heroin addiction specifically, it was something that we didn't talk about, or we didn't talk about addiction, period. And I think the way to help people is to for people to share their experience, strength, and hope, and to talk about their issues with addiction, like Travis the Featherhawk Snyder, he's actually willing to go on the record. And from a journalist perspective, it's really hard for people to talk about their addictions in a newspaper with their name, because it's embarrassing. It's like it's sort of like one of those things they don't want to talk about. But by coming out with their struggles, like Mark Goldfinger and other, like a lot of the vendors who have gone on the record about their issues with addiction, they're helping other people. And they also, by talking about it, they're letting us know that, that you're not alone. That there are people out there just like you. If you're struggling with addiction, or if like a loved one struggling with addiction, it is something that affects us all in different ways. So getting back to other things that you're working on, because I know that you're copy editing and you have the next last word coming up. Didn't Mark talk about a book that he's working on?
Yeah, so he is working with a poet called Lee Varon.
Right.
I think that's how you say it. And she's the lead editor on the book.
Yeah.
And he's helping her out, and they're going to release an anthology featuring all kinds of poets who've been featured in the pages of Spare Change News. So so I don't know when that's coming out, but they're putting it together at the moment.
I actually met, Lee, who is the editor on the book. I met with her initially, and so my direction as the editor of Spare Change was, to hopefully focus on, because she has issues like her with her son dealing with addiction, and hopefully offer, not necessarily make it about addiction, but maybe offer have it sort of a creative direction in regards to people dealing with addictions like Mark.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I would say that's really kind of cool about the Spare Change News poetry page is that I've been thinking this, it sort of mixes it mixes like really well-respected published poets. You'll have one week where someone's been, like Chad Parmenter this week been published in like the Harvard Review.
Yeah.
And then the next week you'll have someone who's like a street poet or a performance spoken word poet.
Right.
So it's just cool the mix that you get, it's like.
When I came in, I was like, oh, we have a poetry page, yay! But I actually think it's been fantastic, and I like being not being like every other paper that's out there. I like having a poetry section. It was, and of course, people have commented. It was like, well, it was a poetry page, and now it's a poetry half page. But I think that it still is there, and it's still the heart of one of the bigger the things that people pick up for in Spare Change. Mm-hmm. So, you have some experience with poetry. Like, what are your thoughts on the poems? Like the last poem.
The one, we should give a shout out to Chad, I think, because his poem is The Falling Man. It's For the Faller is the name of the poem. And it's all about, it's a poem that's basically inspired by a photo by Richard Drew. It's a very famous photo of a man who's falling during 9/11, who's falling from the World Trade Center. So it's a poem that's all about, trying to face up to the unrepresentable So we see that picture of that man, but at the same time, it's like impossible to sort of understand what we're seeing. You know, it's someone in that situation.
I was in New York City during 9/11, and it was pretty traumatic to actually look at the photo that he was referring to. So it kind of was traumatic because I was there and I was actually close to the site. So kind of brought up some, but it was also beautifully written as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And so in it poetic, it's a poem.
Yeah.
But so you know, anything else, Andy? Like, so you have the last word coming up that you're working on, and you know, as far as other things that you're interested in working on.
Well, I'm really just enjoying still meeting all the vendors and just interviewing them, and they every week it's like I learn something new. You know, like this last week it was all about the Vietnam War. This week it's about like housing and in Florida. And just the differences between rich and poor, you know, and how extreme they are.
And I'll tell you, like, the vendors love Andy, and they actually like him.
Do they really?
They do. They come up to me and they're like, I love Andy, and I'm like, what about me? So the vendors definitely and they also love the way that you're telling their story, because it's hard to express. Express their story and make it positive. It's you're telling their story without focusing on the homeless part.
Well, one thing that's coming up more actually that I keep noticing is